If we approve of state programs that redistribute wealth, we must also approve of threats of violence made against peaceful individuals, because this is how the funds are collected. On the other hand, most of us feel uncomfortable about threatening peaceful people when we imagine having to make the threats ourselves.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network every Thursday at 1 p.m. And you could also find me on theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. So today we have Tomasz Kaye coming in from the Netherlands. He is the mastermind behind Butter YouTube channel. Awesome, excellent animated anarcho-capitalist YouTube channel. Just background. He is a voluntarist anarcho-capitalist and a father of a 1.5-year-old. And his website is georgeoughttohelp.com, and he's also got a Facebook page, George Ought to Help, and you can donate to him through Patreon and Bitcoin. So we'll include those links, all those links in the description. So Tomasz, thank you for coming on the show.
You're very welcome. Hello.
Yeah. So I've heard about you. I've heard about you for a while now. You've had your YouTube channel for a few years, right?
Yeah, it's really ancient now. I was kind of struck the other day by how old it is. Yeah.
Yeah, you're not a spring chicken anymore, but still, it's you got a lot of good stuff to impart. A lot of great information, and with animation, that just draws a whole new crowd, because it's one thing when you watch like a talk at the Mises Institute of somebody, Tom Woods or Stephan Kinsella or somebody like that, and they're just saying a speech, and that's one way to learn, right? But that reaches, I think, a certain part of the population that are more intellectual, right? But some people are more visual, right? And so videos like yours, which incorporate these concepts into animation, really reaches them. And that's great. It's just spreading the message that much farther. So I'm very thankful for that. So before we get into those videos, can you go into a little bit of your history on how you became a voluntarist or an anarcho-capitalist? What got you down this path?
Sure. So I have this ancient YouTube channel, and so I'm an atheist, and I was making, when I set up my YouTube channel, that was primarily what I was talking about. I was making videos relating to atheology. At a certain point, one of my subscribers suggested that I look at this one video, and that was from the user. I've forgotten what his username was then. Since then, I believe he went by Fringe Elements. He had a video, in any case, called, I don't know if it was called this, but anyway, the central idea was that the state is a death threat, and it was it talked about the essence of at least state legislature, and its fundamental connection to what are ultimately death threats. These laws work because everyone knows on some level that if you resist enough, like if you don't comply, then the state will see you dead before leaving you alone. So that made a big impression on me. I hadn't thought about it in those terms before. So after watching that video, I was very curious to learn more about it, and most of my research happened through the Mises.org website. That was really an exciting few months for me, especially when first getting into that stuff. And at the same time, I was noticing that the way these ideas were communicated, also that one video that I watched, was very unaccommodating. I don't even know if that's a word, but you know what I mean. It was not at all seductive. in a certain sense.
It wasn't gentle.
No, it wasn't gentle, and it wasn't. It didn't make much accommodation for people who may not be used to hearing these ideas, but who would nevertheless be open-minded enough to consider them. And so I thought that I could do a better job than most of what was out there of putting a similar argument, and I think the argument in George Ought to Help is closely related to the one I saw in that video. And so that's what I started to put that together in the evenings, learning After Effects during through the process, and posted that. And so since then, my focus changed from atheism to voluntarism and everything connected to it.
Any books or podcasts that specifically influenced you?
Yeah. So books that were a big deal to me were the Machinery of Freedom by David Friedman, which is now available. At least one of the previous editions is now available for free as a PDF, which is fantastic. What else? There were so many. I think more recently, Michael Humer's book, The Problem of Political Authority. I think that one's right now. That's the one I recommend to people who I think have enough patience to actually read a book about it, and who want to know more. I think that right now that kind of, in my mind, that does the job that Machinery of Freedom does, but a little bit better, or a little bit more thoroughly. So it's a shame that book is so expensive, relatively. But yeah, that was really important one too.
Yeah, for me, my transformation was catalyzed by the creature from Jekyll Island, and then also Murray Rothbard. A few of the stuff online from Mises.org also, which is the case for the 100% gold dollar, I think, and Anatomy of the State, what has government done to our money, those kinds of things.
Yeah,
really, really powerful short books, but very powerful. And it's just amazing when you read something that, like you said, it's like this, the state surrounds us, right? Laws and taxes and regulations, and, it all surrounds us, right? But we don't necessarily, it's like, I guess it's like, it's like you're living in a fenced in area, but you never actually look up close at the fence, and you don't look at the barbed wires, you don't look at the electricity that's running through it. You're just living there, right? And so you don't necessarily feel confined, right? Until somebody says, you know what? Those things are electrified, and that's sharp. And if you try to escape, somebody's going to shoot you. Like, wait, what?
Yeah, and everyone actually, and everyone kind of knows that. Like they have all the information they need to see that that's true. It's not like you don't have to test it. Like if you just seriously think it through, then you see that it's true. They won't leave you alone. They couldn't. It wouldn't. I mean, the system wouldn't work if they did. Yeah, it's really powerful stuff, I think.
Yeah, so the way, I forget who said it, but a powerful quote that stayed with me is there are people who just want to be left alone, and people who won't leave you alone.
Yeah,
right? Because the people who are attracted to political power are usually not the type of people that are like creative and ingenious and imaginative, right? Entrepreneurs. They're the people that want to add value to society and create jobs and just improve the standard of living, right? Create wealth. Those people don't want to control other people. They don't want to control their neighbor or the town or the state.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess it's kind of, and once you've kind of been introduced to these ideas, then it's like so much of it strikes you how much of the opposition to them, like discursively, is really weak. I think that there's certain I think if you're a statist, if you believe in the necessity or the the essential goodness of the state, then I think at least you have to, in order to argue for that convincingly, you at least have to acknowledge that the state does maintain threats of violence against peaceful people. I think you can't, like, if you're not willing to bite that bullet, then you don't have a leg to stand on, I think. And there are very few people willing to admit that. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah,
thing.
Interestingly enough, I was see some of the minarchists and the nihilists also that say that you say you anarchists don't think the social contract is binding, right? Because you didn't sign it. Well, I didn't sign the non-aggression principle, so why do I have to follow the non-aggression principle? It's violence. That's violence too. I'm like, wait, what? Wait, hold on. It's such a weird way to look at it. It's like yeah. I should be able to kill somebody without repercussions. Okay, I don't have to adhere to the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, I guess in a way, like, I mean, if someone wants to say that, and it's fair enough, and the conversation's over, I guess. Like, for me, like it's all to do with to persuade a person of the validity of these ideas means appealing to their to some of their foundational moral beliefs to begin with. Like, it's if you really think this and this and this is wrong, then you should also think this is wrong. This is just an example of this stuff. If a person doesn't believe there's anything, if they don't have this kind of visceral disgust at the idea of violence against someone who's not aggressing against you, like if that's no problem for them, then this is just a person who's it's not a person who you're going to discuss this with anyway. So it's like, okay, we're just going to ostracize you and try and defend ourselves against you. It's like that.
You're like you're a good candidate for a padded room, right, with a straitjacket.
Right. Yeah, it's like it's an interesting idea that a person who doesn't share your there's like insufficient overlap in your like foundational moral beliefs, and they somehow want you to persuade them about something. And I think it's I don't think dialogue is always necessary or possible. Actually, it is possible that people are so different in what they believe is okay that there's that whole process of reasoning is not going to go anywhere. But I think those people are quite rare. I think actual, like, real sociopaths, or people who really have no, who don't intuitively feel that violence against people is wrong. I think those people are quite rare, fortunately.
Yeah, fortunately, exactly. And the problem is that the contradiction is that when people say, well, it's because people can be evil and can be thieving and can be dishonest, that's why we need government. I'm like, wait a minute, but where do you think the criminals are going to go who want to control other people? I mean, you seriously think they're not going to want to go into an institution that concentrates that evil even more? Like,
right. And also, because thieving's bad, you want to create an institution that operates off theft, essentially. That's also kind of a weird idea. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but this is really kind of preaching to the choir now, right? I mean,
yeah. No, actually, I'm curious also as to, like, when you talk to people, like, how do you introduce this stuff? How do you get people to start thinking about it? Like when you're in your everyday life. Or do you do that?
They ask me what I do, and I say I make anti-political propaganda videos. And they say, "Oh, that sounds interesting." Yeah, you can. And I say, you can Google George Otto help, and that's what I'm not. I guess I'm not an evangelist in. Like I'm not like government is screwing you over, or because I don't think it works.
You sure you sure you're not that guy in the subway, with the Bible shouting at the people passing? You're not that guy, right?
No, I'm not cut out for it. I think you need a special glint in your eye to be able to pull that off.
Yeah,
No.
and a
But
strong,
sorry, go
and
on.
a strong voice. I was just gonna say.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm very soft-spoken. So yeah, but having made that video and having it be, and having the follow-up to that become like a big part of my life now, that kind of has enabled me to introduce this stuff where it otherwise wouldn't have felt appropriate, because it is what I do now. So it's kind of, I can legitimately say that, and then people will say, "Oh, I'll check it out," and sometimes they do.
Yeah. I'm really glad that I found it. So can you just explain? I think you made three different videos, right? So George ought to help, and then you can leave. I think is it called?
Yeah, there's three in that kind of world, or in that series. There's George Ought to Help, there's Edgar the Exploiter, which is about the minimum wage,
Yeah.
and there's You Can Always Leave, which is really the sequel to George Ought to Help. Yeah.
Yeah. So can you go into them and what they're about? Because I think really
Yeah,
awesome.
sure. So George Ought to Help is an examination of the idea of the welfare state and how that operates on a fundamental level, and it invites the viewer to examine whether that fits, whether it accords with their intuitions about the legitimacy of threats of violence. So, of course, the welfare state operates through taxation. Taxation is collected through. It's possible to collect taxation because it's kind of undergirded by these threats of violence, which people know on some level are there if they can't just choose, they can't opt not to pay. So it kind of steps through a bunch of scenarios. The first one is the viewer is asked to consider whether they would be comfortable kind of issuing a threat against a friend of theirs, like a direct interpersonal threat. Like there's this good cause that appears. You feel strongly that this good cause should be supported. Your friend doesn't want to support it. They don't give reasons. Would it be okay to threaten, to beat them up if they, to try and get them to donate? And of course, I hope that most people would kind of recoil at that suggestion, and of course that's not okay. And then the scenario is modified, so it becomes more and more like the situation under representative democracy, where you have a group of voters who are deciding the course of action to take, but the threats are still there. They're just institutionalized. And so you have these two extremes, and you have a couple of stages in between in which kind of the situation morphs towards resembling the final one a little bit more. And the question I ask to people who post critical comments mostly is, in which of those situations does it become okay to threaten violence against your friend? At what point is there like? At what point is there an ethically relevant difference that happens? And so far, I haven't received any kind of adequate answer to that. So that's what that video is about. That's how I think it works, at least. And after that, I made.
Before you go into the next one, I just want to comment something that came to mind is when George is the one that refuses to help, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when George refuses to help, what came to mind is like, in a voluntary society, right, or voluntarism, the freedom is also freedom also encompasses the freedom to be racist, bigoted, sexist, discriminatory, basically, right? So
yeah.
So George might not have wanted to help the guy who needs help for any reason, because he's a guy, or because he's gay, or because he's black, or he's Mexican, right? So it could be for any reason, and I think that's another thing that really gets under people's skin when we say again.
People really don't like that. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, yeah. When you say that, what is wrong with a racist? You know, of course, as long as he doesn't hurt anybody, of course, right? It's just a belief, right? I mean, it may be a very damaging belief to him and his society and his peers, but again, it's just a belief, and he's not hurting anybody with that belief.
Yeah, I've on the I mean, racism is a big thing, and a touchy thing, of course. But I think it's like it's a really badly used term. Like it's really, most of the time it's really not clear to me exactly what people mean when they use the term.
Yeah, yeah.
Races exist in the sense that they're, you can identify these categories and you can make predictions about those groups that hold true, like they differ in certain ways. So you could, and from that you can create you can create all kinds of hypothetical situations in which the rational thing to do would be to discriminate on the basis of race. Like say you're in such and such a situation, you're evaluating this person, but you only know their race. Like there's nothing else you know about them. Do you choose this guy or that one to do this particular thing? And yeah, then it makes sense to discriminate according to race. And if that's so, maybe that's racist. And if it is, then at least in hypothetical situations, we should be racists. So it's like and of course the word racist is used. It's a really damning term. So it doesn't. There's a mismatch there. I think. I think we need to. I'm using the statist we. We need to think more carefully about what that word means. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing is like I have a book by Walter Block. I haven't read it yet, but it's on discrimination, and I've seen him speak a lot about it, and basically, we discriminate every day, all the time, right? It is impossible not to discriminate. When you make a choice for something or to do something, you are excluding other choices. You are discriminating, right? I saw a little speech by Walter Williams when he was asked about racism and discrimination, and he's basically said, "I discriminated when I married my wife. I preferred her over other women, right? I was discriminating. And even now that we're married, I'm still discriminating her over, and my wife is happy that I'm discriminating her over other women."
Of course. Like you have this very peculiar situation where like shopkeepers are legally barred from, they're not permitted to turn people away who match a particular demographic that they, for whatever reason, good or bad, don't like. They're not permitted to do that. And at the same time, people are permitted. I mean, no one thinks twice about it. People discriminate according to race in their interpersonal and romantic relations all the time. And this is perfectly okay. We think, and I see no justification for a difference in attitudes towards those two situations. Like in the one situation you have, like a medium of exchange passing hands. But what's ethically magical about that? How does why would that make a difference? And you could argue that, for instance, like let's say there's someone who's very lonely. They maybe they never had a romantic or sexual partner, and they approach you, and they're trying to seduce you, let's say, and you turn them down because you're just not into whatever groups they happen to fit into. There's a case for maybe that turning them down is more damaging to them than being turned away from a shop that bakes cakes, for instance.
Yeah.
And yet, there's this weird double standard. I don't understand it. I don't see any justification for it.
Yeah, because if you're obligated to do something because you think someone else might do something horrible to themselves because you turned them down, then again, you don't own yourself. You don't own your actions, right? They have a higher claim to your actions, right? So to me that violates, self-ownership. And you're right, like if the individual can discriminate with all these things, and the dating world, and in every single interaction you make, why is that different with the business, right? The individual can discriminate, so too can the business discriminate, because it's just about individuals, right? Individuals acting in a certain way, right?
Yeah, and with the individual romantic sphere, at least, I think there's in general, people are okay with the idea that people can make mistakes and that people can make bad decisions. They should be allowed to do that. But that tolerance is not extended to situations that involve pieces of paper changing hands, or that's really, really odd.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So okay. So can you go on with was it you're free to leave? I forget the.
So the second one was Edgar the Exploiter. That's chronologically the second one.
Okay.
That one was about the minimum wage, and
I really enjoyed that one. That was a good one.
Thank you. Yeah, so that illustrates what the minimum wage actually does to the most vulnerable members of the workforce, which I think still not enough people understand. And I think that's some of these things are quite counterintuitive. And I think in a way it's kind of low-hanging fruits. Like it's a very easy idea to understand. I think once it's been presented to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's really important that this kind of that people don't stop with their emotional response to a particular policy, like fair wage for everyone, and they go a little bit further and understand what the actual consequences of that are likely to be. So yeah, that's a video that potentially appealing to, or at least compatible with, the minarchist set of ideas. And then the last in so far.
Wait, let me just comment a little bit on that one. That one. So the minimum wage is again another highly emotionally charged topic, right, for a lot of people, especially I think on the left, right, socialist type people, who want. What they call it, a living wage, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what exactly is a living wage? And you take into account inflation, the Federal Reserve, currency creation. You take into, it's like, and then it's just funny how people think that you pass a law and you force businesses to pay a certain way, a certain amount.
What could go wrong?
That violates, that kind of magic that violates the laws of economics can suddenly, vanish, and everything will be we'll all be richer because some old guy nobody ever met passed, wrote on a piece of paper, and then pointed a gun at.
Yeah, I think it really it says a couple of things about a kind of mindset that's really prevalent, and like on the one hand, that the state does, people have the idea that the state does have these powers, which it doesn't. I mean, it has a lot of power. It has power to use violence. The idea it can't overturn economic law, of course. And the other thing is, like, people view the economy as a static system. So you can, it's just like it's there on like a in your spreadsheet, or you can change this bit. It's just this bit that's wrong. So you change that, and everything's okay then. And of course it's nothing like that. And everything responds to everything else some way or another.
I guess you just remind me of something when you said that maybe some people view the economy as a program, and the government is the programmer.
Yeah.
And there are certain bugs that happen, and then they have to come in and they have to fix the bugs. Right?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And it's like but it's when once you've seen the mistake in that thinking, it's difficult, I guess, for me to then put myself in the shoes of people who haven't seen it again, I suppose. Like, of course, the employer is going to think twice about how he can arrange his business. Like, where can he save costs? Who's now costing more than they're bringing in?
Right. And not only that, but all the different factors of competition. Like, you have workers competing with each other, and then you have the employers competing with each other, and then the relationship between the employer and the employee, and then and then the not only the employers competing with each other in the same field, and then maybe they're competing with other fields unrelated where people could be spending their money, but they're not because they're buying from him, right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. And there was if you Google the indispensable janitor fallacy, a guy called John Colt has addressed one of the common complaints made about the Edgar the Exploiter video, and I hope I can summarize it correctly. So the idea is like what a lot of people said in the comments as well is like so in the story there's this Edgar is this kind of evil capitalist stereotype who has a factory. Simon works there sweeping the floor, and so when the minimum wage is introduced, Simon's estimated marginal revenue product is lower than the wage he would legally be required to be paid. So Edgar fires Simon, and the objection a lot of people made was you can't run a factory without someone cleaning it. It's like the janitor is indispensable. You can't. The rubbish would heap up. You would have dust. I don't know exactly what they imagine, but things would go to hell without someone sweeping the floor. And I think what it misses out is that again it's like this example of the static systems thinking. Like people imagine that Edgar has this structure of production, and all he can do is knock out Simon. That's his option. Like he can have Simon or he can knock him out. He can get rid of him, and the rest of it is kind of fixed. And of course, that's not the way it works. Edgar is a kind of he's a reasoning human with like all the options available to him as his time and resources allows for, and he could do one of any number of things. He could rearrange his structure of production. He could mechanize more, all the way to he could choose to close down all operations and live off whatever he's managed to earn. So people are kind of stuck in this idea that he has a factory. How's the factory going to run? Under this very particular set of assumptions.
Yeah.
So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, they just take something like a specific, I guess, is that cherry picking? They just take a specific detail and then just delete it, and then like, well, it wouldn't work, it'd collapse. Like you said, like in a program, the difference is that the different bits in a program are not reasoning and don't have critical analysis capabilities, and don't have logic, whereas people in the economy are thinking individuals, human beings, making their own choices constantly, right? Billions of choices made every day, and which is again another reason why it is impossible for any leader or president or prime minister or anybody who tries to direct these billions of interactions. Anything he does will cause damage, ripple down repercussions, right?
Yeah, of course. And I think people don't like the messiness of decentralization. Like I think in decentralized systems are I'm not sure if I'm using that word completely correctly. In systems where there is all this highly local implicit knowledge that people are relying on all the time, mistakes are being made all the time, all across the economy, and I think that idea, people don't like that idea. I believe, and it's kind of there's something seductive about the idea of central planners who can just get it right for everyone, and avoid all that redundancy, all those messy mistakes, and I think people don't yet appreciate in general how important those mistakes are. Like that's a crucial part of the process, and they need to be happening all over the economy all the time.
Yeah, statism is like I forget who said it. It's like it keeps the people in a perpetual state of infancy, where they don't they don't look to solve their own problems, but rather they look to their rulers to solve it for them, right? And also another way I was just thinking about it, perhaps it's like the human body, and in the mistakes that you said, it's like in the human body, how many times do cells, mutate and maybe form spontaneous cancers, but you never see them because they automatically are destroyed, resorbed, and disposed of by your immune system. And so, and eventually those kinds of things make you stronger, right? So perhaps in a similar way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's really maybe it's overlooked that there's an aspect of appreciating markets which is aesthetic. Like you kind of have to have a taste for the way that works. It has to kind of appeal to you. I think on the level of aesthetics. Like I think that maybe that's not talked about enough. Like I like it that there are all these mistakes being made everywhere. That there's a lot of redundancy, and that the result is, if it's left to itself, very robust, and that you don't have these catastrophic failures that sweep through the whole thing. I believe. Just to pick up on one thing you said, I found myself being more careful about using the word infantilize, because I don't think, since having a kid, I don't think it's necessarily the case that kids do look to their parents to do everything for them. Depending on how you parent, I guess.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Or at least that's what I would hope, at least.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah, it's true. Yeah, I have a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old, so I really try to treat them as an equal, right? The whole idea about peaceful parenting and about raising your kid and respecting them as a person, as an individual, right? That they have their own right to their own body, self-ownership, all the rights that you have, and so therefore that would preclude things like corporal punishment and spanking and even public school. So many things that most parents don't think twice about asking consent for. And circumcision, and they just do because most of the time because everybody else does it, right? It's the appeal to popularity, or it's been done, for so many years. So why would I not do it, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, good point.
Oh, one other thing I thought was I think is an interesting tangent. So you talked about the analogy with a program, like the economy versus a computer program, something like that. Mm-hmm. I think there are a very limited number of video games that do a decent job of making the case for freedom, or decentralization, and I think that has something to do with the way that that kind of model. Like if you you have a lot of SimCity-ish things, like in which you're the controller, you're arranging these things, and that's what makes it interesting to join in with that process. Like you have that power. SimCity isn't interesting if everyone just does their thing without needing you, and it works fine, and even it works better than if you do get involved. And I guess the most interesting ones are the video games that, like the massively multiplayer ones, where you're kind of essentially they outsource their interestingness to actual humans who are making genuine decisions with very local knowledge, intrinsic knowledge, that kind of stuff. It's something I've been thinking about lately. I'm involved in making a video game, and so it's kind of in the back of my mind how and if even video games could be a medium that can be used to kind of to propagandize, essentially. And I don't think propaganda is a dirty word. I'm quite comfortable to use it.
Yeah, I was actually wondering when you said you described your what you do as anti-political propaganda. Why do you choose to use the word propaganda? Because that does have a negative connotation.
Yeah. I guess I guess there's a number of levels to it. On the one hand, it's kind of, I suppose it's kind of sensational. Like, people are used to that connotation. I suppose people are not used to people, saying that's what I do. That's just what I do. On the other hand, propaganda means media designed to influence opinion, which is unquestionably what I'm doing. It's kind of connotation, like the negative connotation it has, it kind of adds to that, through deception or through dishonesty. And of course, I don't think that's what I'm doing. But the core of what propaganda is, I believe that's definitely what I'm doing, and it is a separate form of expression. Like, it's distinct from other stuff that's out there. I think it's important to acknowledge that that's a category it belongs to.
Yeah, that's really the first time I heard of somebody, especially an anarcho-capitalist, refer to their own work as propaganda. And I will reconsider the definition of that word now. So
yeah.
So you've influenced me.
Okay, good.
And what about the last video in your series that you've done so far?
Yeah, so the last in that series is You Can Always Leave, and it's the longest of the three. And it's like the script of that video is based, often kind of taken like verbatim from comments that were made in response to George Ought to Help. So the form of You Can Always Leave is two characters, you can imagine perhaps a statist and a voluntarist, and they're having a discussion about George Ought to Help. So it's kind of, they're watching it on a TV screen, and they have a conversation about it afterwards. And that conversation is also illustrated with, kind of sequences of the kind of visualize the hypothetical situations they're considering. So like the skeleton character, the one that I did the voice for, is the statist. I thought that was appropriate that I should take that part. A big thing in my mind was that I didn't want to straw man what the critics of the video had been saying, and I came across that expression recently. Iron Man. I wanted to Iron Man their criticisms. So I wanted to make them modify them to make them as strong as possible in my mind, at least. So I kind of, I took out all the name calling and all the invective, and I took what I thought were the best bits. And I had the skeleton character make those objections in a very civil, reasonable way, I thought. And then the lion character, or the yellow character, responds to those in a way that I think, in a way that I might, if I was kind of especially, on it, and I could get the words out in the right order. So, so I believe it kind of addresses the most commonly made and the most weighty criticisms, and they kind of fall into two groups. Those criticisms, like the first ones, are essentially saying, George Ought to Help is misleading because the state doesn't threaten violence against people. All you get is a fine, etc. And so, of course, the lion takes the skeleton character through this kind of chain of events that happen, and this essentially a series of increasingly severe punishments that ends with being shot if you resist strongly enough. It's like taxation is certainly enabled by this ultimate threat of deadly force. I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind. And then the second objection was that the idea of the social contract, that this arrangement, there are threats of violence, fair enough, but you've consented to them somehow because of this idea. And so I think, so I briefly talked about that idea. I didn't sign anything, that kind of idea. And I don't think that's a very strong objection to the idea of the social contract, because you do have examples of agreements which don't require a signature, like restaurants, blah blah blah.
Mm-hmm.
I think the much stronger objection is that the state has it is not in a position to extend that offer to you to begin with. Like, it has no legitimate claim to the land you're living on, the stuff you're using. So, it can say, these, and you can use this stuff, and these are the conditions. But that's in my mind, at least, and I think in the minds of probably most voluntarists, it's not binding, because the state it has no right to do that in the first place. So even if you would kind of agree, if you would say, okay, then you're doing so under duress, and it's an entity that has no right to make that demand from you in the first place. So that's what I believe, at least.
All right, so I'm gonna play the devil's advocate here. So, so the first thing I'll say is, I've when talking about this topic about you can always leave, or it's a social contract. The first thing is, well, you accepted it because once you came of age, I guess 21 years old, you could have left and gone to another country, right? But since you chose to stay, therefore you are accepting of the terms of living here. It's like they say, it's like living in a condo complex. You have to pay your dues, and then you get services as a result, right? So it's no different with the state. You pay your dues and you get services. So why are you complaining?
Yeah.
What would you say?
Like, the difference is that the state doesn't own the land that you live on. So it's it doesn't get to even legitimately offer you those terms. Like, it has nothing to bargain with legitimately, I think. So you can say that. You can say you choose to stay, blah blah blah. But unless you can show that the state does own the land, and not many people try and do that even, then it's kind of this is all just hot air, essentially.
Yeah, and then so I would say something like that, and then the person would tell me, all right, so even if the state doesn't own the land, try not paying your taxes and staying. What's going to happen to you? And then just tell the state you don't own the land, and then
you're gonna get into trouble for sure.
Yeah.
This isn't this is like, everyone knows this. This isn't an attempt at persuasion even, right? It's just like this is actually a threat.
yeah, and so to this person, it seems to me that morality has no bearing on their life. Like, they just live so that they don't die, basically. It's like, they don't think of the world in terms of morals, right? Because they think of the world, I'm paying my taxes so I don't die or get in prison. But I'm like, or I guess we were talking about not nihilists or or sociopaths. They don't kill people, not because they think it's immoral, but because they might die in the process. The only reason why they wouldn't, right?
Yeah, I think in my mind, most people who would make arguments like that, I mean, I guess nihilists can be among them, but it's also the case that people make arguments like that when they do have moral convictions, but they're insufficiently interested in having a coherent set of moral ideas.
Mm-hmm.
I think that can happen too. I guess I should say I'm a moral nihilist, in the sense that I don't believe there are. I don't believe that moral facts exist in the sense of mind-independent aspects of the universe. But I do notice that I have very strong moral intuitions, and these are very important to me. And it's also important to me that these moral intuitions cohere with each other. I won't tolerate contradictions there. So I think it can go different ways. And nihilism doesn't necessarily, or moral nihilism doesn't necessarily mean anything's okay if you can get away with it, which a lot of people do think.
Yeah, I'm pretty curious now, because the way I understood nihilism anyway is in that sense, like subjective morality. Like, I don't believe in good or bad or good or immoral or moral. I just think whatever is expedient to me and that doesn't cause me harm now, And so because usually I tend to talk about objective morality in the sense that it's universalizable, in the same sense that the laws of economics cannot be violated without repercussions, consequences, right? And same thing with laws of mathematics, of planetary motion, of physics. Same thing with laws of economics, right? Cannot be violated without incurring consequences. Same thing with the laws of morality. They are universalizable. They're not dependent on laws and political scribbles, because if you kill somebody, there will be there will be inherent consequences from the family members or people who saw you do it or whatever, So it's not necessary for a law to exist for it to have consequences. So in that sense, to me anyway, I look at that as being universal or objective morality.
I guess I would disagree. To me, that sounds still like a pragmatic, an appeal to pragmatism, because it doesn't catch the occasion that this absurd hypothetical again. Really unpopular person, no family, has wronged you somehow. You could get away with killing them.
Yeah.
This would be expedient for you for some reason. Maybe they would not interfere with some plan you have. If in this hypothetical, if you could be guaranteed somehow that no one would ever know, and maybe that makes the hypothetical already sufficiently removed from reality that it's not applicable. I'm open to that rebuttal. But for me, it's not really satisfying. To me, I would, in that situation, as someone who doesn't believe in moral facts, I would certainly not kill this person unless they were, trying to do the same to me, because it's really, really important to me for my moral beliefs and actions to cohere. And it sounds very dry, put that if I say it in those terms, but
you mean wooden?
I'm sorry.
You mean it sounds wooden, right?
Yeah, exactly. It sounds very cold. I mean, this is the language I use to describe what's a really visceral response. Like, it's not okay. Like, I feel that in the, if you can say that, in the core of my being or in my heart or whatever metaphor you choose. Like, I feel that very, very strongly. And at the same time, I don't believe that feeling has anything to do with moral facts. I believe that feeling is very probably a product of evolution. And I'm still not going to do it. It doesn't matter, because for me, it's so important not to mess that up. That moral cohesion is so important for me that I'm still not going to do it.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me, and so I'm kind of, I guess I want you to, I want to hear an elaboration, because when you say that you're a moral nihilist, and then you describe yourself as a person that would not, aggress against somebody, even if you could get away with it, and no consequences would have, you wouldn't do it because it would be morally repugnant to you.
Yeah.
So, in what way are you a moral nihilist then? Is what I'm wondering.
Well, yeah. So, I think. At least in my understanding of the term, moral realists believe that there is such a thing as a moral fact. Like, there is such a thing as a mind independent ought. Like with a capital O. Like, you ought not do blah blah blah. Even if evolutionary history was different, maybe, or even if you could get away with it, etc. In any situation, it would not be okay, because it's somehow. And this is me filling in a little bit now, but it's somehow part of the cosmos. That it's just wrong, like with a capital W. And for me, that's not the case. I don't believe facts like that exist. I believe I've kind of inherited a bunch of wiring, or that kind of stuff, that makes me feel certain ways in certain situations, and some of those feelings are very, very strong. And and I prefer for the actions and beliefs related to those feelings to cohere with one another. And like the feeling of guilt is a very strong feeling that I want nothing to do with. I just don't want that. So moral nihilism as a philosophical stance certainly doesn't mean that the person would be a dangerous or shifty or otherwise unpleasant person to be around or to deal with. But of course, I would say that. So I think I don't know, a very naive moral nihilism might say, if you can get away with it, do it. But I think that's pretty short-sighted. Like, most people just feel bad doing stuff that they find morally repugnant. And I think most people do find it morally repugnant to attack someone, who's not in the process of attacking them.
Yeah. All right. I just wanted to elaborate a little bit on that because I guess the only thing that's important, we talk about these things with people online and everything, and about the universality of morality and things like that. But I guess it all comes down to would you use violence to get what you want, right? And that's what it comes down to, right? And if you wouldn't, then you're essentially a peaceful individual. I guess, regardless of the semantics and the terminology that we call each other, right?
Absolutely. I would much prefer to live in a community of voluntarist Catholics, for instance, than atheist statists, for sure.
Exactly.
Even if they believe that it's primarily a threat of punishment by the universe, the creator of the universe, which is keeping them from doing bad things to me. I don't really mind.
Yeah. For a long time, I thought that was a contradiction. A Christian voluntarist. Because it's all about, like, there's no no masters, no slaves, no rulers, right? No subjects. But I interviewed a voluntarist Christian, and was talking about that, and again, like, I think Jesus, a lot of the things he said were very libertarian, if not voluntarist. He never advocated for a welfare state, right? Maybe he advocated for charity, but not a welfare state.
Yeah. I guess for me the kind of, I guess, complaint or worry about religion in general, like organized religion, then that I still find compelling and a worry, is that the religious texts, which are found so important, do seem extremely malleable. Like, they contain a lot of contradiction. So as long as these texts are being revered, there's room for bad stuff to happen in the future by people who are sufficiently convinced that these are the word of the creator of the universe. I'm sympathetic to that argument or that worry.
Yeah. Like, when I was growing up in high school, I did a lot of reading into world religions. I'm not religious myself, but I didn't grow up in any religion, but I studied a lot of world religions independent of my government school. And I did kind of conclude that there's just reading the Bible a little bit not as a factual text, but as a literary text, as a novel, work of fiction. And there's a lot of violence, a lot of bloodshed, a lot of genocide, a lot of killing, and to me, God seems to be more like a jealous ex-girlfriend, like snooping and just always envious. What are you saying about me? Are you worshiping somebody else? Like, you seeing somebody else?
God is a really bad role model. Yeah. God of the Bible.
But yeah, so I have come to realize that by far the religious of statism is by far much more dangerous than any kind of organized religion has ever been.
Yeah, I think so too. Yeah.
And Larkin Rose did a great job with this. I don't know if have you read that book, The Most Dangerous Superstition?
I haven't. I've heard about it a lot.
Yeah. He does a great job with that one. So So if there's anything else that you want to, you plug your YouTube channel, your website, anything else you want to mention to the listeners before we sign off?
Yeah, that's a good question. Sure that there ought to be something, but nothing pops to mind, I'm afraid.
So just the YouTube channel, right? And the one that we mentioned, the website and the Facebook, and any other projects that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah. So I'm making quite a different thing, like a local multiplayer racing game.
Oh, okay.
which I'm busy with.
So not
Cello.
Not anarcho-capitalist at all.
No, I haven't found a way to work that in.
Okay.
Yeah, I do want to do. I want to do something along those lines, though. I want to combine those things, but I haven't found like something that seems like a viable plan yet. It seems like everything I've considered seems to be too much kind of shoehorning one thing into another. But I haven't given up yet, so I'm still have that in the back of my mind. Apart from that, I'm working on a 3-part series about Bitcoin called Bitcoin for the Intelligent Layperson.
Oh, you posted one of those, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. That's right. I remember that. Okay.
So the first part 1 is online right now, and it's kind of it's intended to be a thing that kind of fills the gap between like the most basic of the basic video primers about Bitcoin and the more hardcore technical things. It's kind of I hope it lands kind of somewhere in between. So for people who aren't quite satisfied with the usual things you hear about Bitcoin, but aren't necessarily familiar with the language of the technology surrounding cryptography. So I hope that will be useful for people to learn more about it. I think it's a super important development and will continue to become more so.
Yeah, I love talking about Bitcoin to some people. It's a great, I think that's a great introduction to maybe talking about voluntarism. Like with me, when I talk to people, I start usually talking about monetary economics. Like I don't mention, anarchists. I don't mention, government is illegitimate or immoral or, taxation is theft, because a lot of those things can have, emotional responses that are not too pleasant. so yeah, monetary economics, talking about money, talking about central banks, talking about Bitcoin, those tend to be more neutral topics and don't really enrage people too much.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's true. Yeah, it's a good way in that sense. I suppose I like in my work I kind of like to do the contrarian thing and to say stuff which I wholeheartedly believe, but stuff which I also know that many people are going to be like, what? How can you say such a thing? Like I guess it has that in common with Walter Block's book, right? Defending the
I love that book.
I love that book. I hope I got the title right.
That's a great one.
Yeah, I'm really attracted to that approach as well, I guess. I guess I like that. Like I suppose I like the adversarial component of talking about this stuff too, and maybe that's not strategically the most useful thing, but I definitely enjoy it and I learn a lot from it.
So you're saying you don't take the approach to make more friends? You're saying, right?
No.
and you say
no, I have too many friends. I'm looking for ways to lose them.
you say that. So you say the most subversive things in the softest, gentlest voice possible.
Yeah, something like that, actually. Something like that. You could see this stuff as a kind of filter, like the people who make it through this stuff and still want to associate with you somehow. They're okay. Like they're the good ones.
Yeah, they have like some tough moral skin there. So.
Yeah, or they're willing to think about things a little more seriously, perhaps, or a little more carefully, or even just to postpone judgment, because that's also a rare enough thing.
Yeah,
like people who might disagree with me quite strongly, but don't write me off as a person on the basis of that. I think that's pretty valuable.
Yeah, before you explain your economic analysis of why minimum wage is immoral, they say you just hate poor people. What?
Yeah.
Wait, you
It's
didn't
true.
let me finish explaining.
Yeah. So I mean, in my non-internet life, I'm surrounded by people who are to some degree, at least implicit statists. I think they believe in some level in the goodness or necessity of the state. So that's maybe, yeah. I think maybe that's that varies from place to place, I guess, because I guess if you live in New Hampshire, for instance, that's a different thing entirely. But yeah, I suppose that's also going to have an effect on how you choose to design what you want to say. I have my friends in the back of my mind when I'm making stuff, so I suppose that feeds into it somewhere.
Very nice. So all right. So you said the Bitcoin is a 3-part series, right?
Yeah.
All right. So maybe when you finish that, maybe we can have you back on. We can have a discussion of Bitcoin.
Would be great.
That's a great topic too. It's pretty complex and it's very interesting. I like talking about that as well. So awesome conversation, Tomasz. Thank you very
likewise.
much.
Thank you.
Beautiful topics. I really enjoyed it. So hopefully we'll get you back on. Do you know when you might get that done? Like by the end of the year or maybe longer?
I don't dare say. I've learned that promising that kind of stuff is only brings pain, so I'm not going to do it.
Pain and you sound like my wife. That's what she says. I don't like to make plans because then I just get disappointed. So we're just gonna go and do stuff. That's all I'm gonna tell you. You sound exactly like her. It's funny.
There's a lot of wisdom to that, I think.
I mean, I'm fine with that. Plan or no plan, it's no problem for me. So I'm pretty easygoing guy. So. Cool. Excellent conversation, Tomasz. Thank you very much. So this is Peaceful Anarchism. Oh, by the way, if anybody wants to donate, you can donate through PayPal or Bitcoin. Although PayPal has it's getting a little sketchy, but so far that's all I got. If you want to send gold and silver, by all means try. I don't really trust the USPS, but you can try. So be my guest. Send me some value. We'll find a way to receive it. So thanks a lot, everyone. Thank you, Tomasz. Really appreciate it. So this is Peaceful Anarchism on the Voluntary Virtues Network and theconsciousresistance.com and theseedsofliberty.com. Wishing everyone have a wonderful day. Take care. Bye.